Our next guest we're going to welcome on stage played for two legendary Hall of Fame coaches in Gene Sobolewski and Charlie Ruslavage. He went 31-10 in 4 seasons as a Golden Eagle football player here. 31-10, and was part of a dominating defensive effort in the PSAC Championship game in 1983. He has 293 career tackles. He was an All-American. He was All-Conference. He was All-District. He was all everything. John Hughes. Hold on to that. Just put it in your lap. John, you had the privilege of being recruited by some of the best names in terms of Clarion's long, proud football tradition. But at the time you were recruited, you didn't really know much about Clarion. Is that right?
That's right. I didn't know anything about Clarion until the charismatic Coach Pay came over to Canton, Ohio, and he told me the story of Clarion Football. At the time, they had 25 straight winning seasons. They had just won a championship 2 years prior, and they had this incredible coaching staff that had been there a long time. But the best thing about the coaches was that they weren't only good football coaches, they were great people. So I was very fortunate to be recruited by Coach Pay.
Let's talk about that coaching staff a little bit. We're going to jump ahead of where I thought I was going to be at this point. But one of the things that you mentioned to me was when you practiced as a team, it wasn't so much about the length of practice. In fact, practices were very short and intense, but very well disciplined.
Well, the coaches were good enough that we could have shorter practices and still be better prepared. But the best thing about our practices, I thought, was Coach Quinn was my defensive line coach. And Coach Quinn would start every practice with a joke. Sometimes he would tell a joke, or if we wanted a funny one of the players would tell a joke. And in honor of Coach Quinn, I thought I would tell a joke so funny that it would make your hair fall out, but I can see some of the men have already heard it.
Another one of your coaches, Charlie Ruslavage. We're going to go back a little bit and jump around, I suppose. But the 1983 conference championship game, the defense stood tall as injuries took their toll over the course of the game. You held East Stroudsburg to 84 total yards, -16 rushing, and 13 total sacks. You had 13 tackles and 4 sacks in that game. Do you remember that?
I remember that game, but the biggest challenge was I had Kevin Ewing on my left, I had John Haslett on my right, and it wasn't a matter of beating the offensive guys. You had to beat Kevin or John to the ball. So to get any stats, if you see Kevin's stats, I think he has 400 career tackles. I'm racing against John and Kevin to get to the quarterback. I had 4 sacks, and Kevin had 4 sacks, and John had 4 sacks. So that was very defensive-dominated game.
But going back to that game, Coach Ruslavage said after that game that was the best defensive effort he had ever seen. For a guy that had that much success, what's that mean?
I'd have to agree with him. We lost our first-string quarterback, our second-string quarterback in the first half. We were on our third-string quarterback, so that was a lot of fun. I never had so much fun as in that game.
You know, you talked about playing next to Kevin Ewing and the Haslets. You came to Clarion as a linebacker.
I did.
And you were sort of in the middle of the numbers game here when they moved you to the defensive line.
Well, to give Coach Ruslavage and Coach Sobolewski, Tony Linan, Coach Quinn, I was only 210 pounds. And we had linebackers 250 pounds and defensive backs 230 pounds. And Kevin Ewing was about 210 pounds. So these coaches didn't just look at our size. They said, who's the best players, and try to get them in the game. And Coach Jacks has a lot to do with that too. But they put Kevin and myself on the defensive line. When we played in that game, Kevin was 210 pounds and I was 210 pounds. And we weren't even as big as our defensive backs. And they saw something that nobody else could see and put me on the defensive line.
You mentioned sort of this cast of characters on the defensive line. Kevin is obviously here. Some other folks from your era are here. What does it mean to you that all these years later, 35 years later, there's still a bond among teammates?
Well, the great thing, Kevin was my big brother in the fraternity. He's a year older than me. Lou Weirs is in our fraternity and also on the defensive line crew, and Eddie Goff and Tony Colecci. But we were great friends on the field. We were great friends off the field, and we're still great friends today. So it's that's one of the good things about Clarion is I really feel that from so many people. They're so inviting and they make you feel good, so you want to come back.
When you were in college, you roomed with a couple guys that were athletes. Pat Carble, you mentioned, and Jim Beekner, some guys that are already in the luminaries.
And John Swersler.
And John Swersler. I forgot about John.
He was a captain of the swim team, yeah.
So who would you say was the best all-around athlete in that group? And you can say yourself if you really believe that.
Well, we had 2 football players, a wrestler and a swimmer, so we can cut out the swimmer, right? Sorry, Coach Miller. I guess it depends what we're doing that day, because if Jim Beekner is going to tie you up in a knot, we can say he was the best one. But I don't know. We were all kind of different. The funny thing was Jim would come into school at 232 pounds, and he wrestled 196. So he would come in looking like a linebacker, and Pat Carble was our quarterback. He was like 240 pounds, and I was the defensive lineman at 210 pounds. So if you walked into our apartment, you didn't know who did what. So it was an interesting group.
You mentioned to me that you think what's really amazing about Clarion is just the idea of the coaching family and the player fraternity as it is, that you're all coming back. And like I said before, you mentioned the idea that Clarion's not brick and mortar, it's people, and it's these relationships that are built.
Well, I kind of get that when we talk about a church. A church is not the brick and mortar, a church is the people. And you don't feel anything from a building, but when you come back and you have these people and you have this great atmosphere, that gives you that, sense of belonging. So, yeah, Clarion to me is much more than the brick and mortar. You got a beautiful campus, but the day that I got recruited, one of the things I liked when I came to campus was how inviting everybody was. And then our coaching staff, I come back and see Coach Jacks. My favorite story about Coach Jacks, he was a 2-year starting quarterback at Penn State.
Right.
And I always tell him, it's too bad you played quarterback before they invented the television, or you'd have been pretty popular.
Let's talk about your academic career very briefly. You mentioned to me that one of the professors that really meant a lot to you was Joe Grunenwald. And when he became president of the university, you thought it was very fitting.
There's like so many examples. It's fun. I love what you're doing, but Rich Herman was starting when I started. And Dave Cadis was starting as a graduate assistant when I started. Then he becomes athletic director. And I had a class, it was called Consumer Behavior. It was my favorite class that Dr. Grunewald taught, and he was in the marketing department back then. Go figure, he was an engineer and he was teaching business. And, then I find out years later, I read that he became president. And it's just so nice to go back to the school where your teacher is president, your grad assistant is athletic director. You see Coach Jacks, and I used to go to Coach Sobolewski's house and see Ruslavage, and I always go to Jack and Doreen Quinn. I still have a great relationship with them. And you have all these people that you stay connected with, and that you don't want to go back just to see a building. You want to go back to see the people.
Is there anybody here with you tonight you'd like to take some extra time to recognize, to honor, even if they're not here with you this evening? Is there anybody you'd like to thank for your success at Clarion?
Well, there's just 2 groups. My family. The best lottery you can win is the parent lottery, because you can't pick your parents. And I'm very fortunate to have my mom of 93 years. She escaped from the retirement community to come to this tonight. Yeah. Hi, Mom. She couldn't wait to get out. And my brothers and sisters and nephews and nieces and great nephews and nieces, my son Tyler and my daughter Alaina, Tyler's girlfriend Danny, and then of course my fiancé Monica and all of her family, many of which are here tonight. From that family group, I'd like to thank all of them for all they've done for me.
Yeah, you have 15 tables here or something, right?
That's why they're cheering and clapping. And then from the Clarion group, I've mentioned a lot of the coaches and my position coach, and he's been a lifelong friend, Coach Quinn and his wife Doreen. And then all the coaches, that I had were wonderful that we talked about. And then the players, my D-line crew with Kevin and Lou and Eddie and Tony Colecci and the whole team. My roommates, Jim Beekner and Pat Carble and John Swerzler, great people. And there's somebody that we all appreciate, and I'm sure the other sports, wrestling has a great camaraderie coming back, but Bo Garatano and his wife Joyce have reconnected the football alumni with a football program. And Chris Weibel, the head football coach, who I think is a great coach, he has allowed us to stay connected. So that's a lot of fun for me. I certainly appreciate all those people. And then finally, our family suffered a tragedy where we lost my daughter Alaina, and I can't tell you how many people from Clarion supported us. And our family really appreciates that. So I'd like to thank you for doing that. And then I'd like to dedicate this to my daughter Alaina and my son Tyler. Thank you.
Thank you, John.